Hello and welcome to Bookworms. It's the show where we read books, talk about books. I'm your host, Alex.
And I'm Joe.
How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing well, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I like how I asked how you're doing, even though we literally just had dinner together and I've been talking for like 2 hours.
Yeah. You're also in a lot of trouble with a bunch of other people because you were kind of a bum and just came straight to the house here and didn't go out with friends.
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're just a
Yeah.
you're just a turd.
Yeah. Even worse, I was thinking about it, and then he told me who was coming, and I was like, nah, just stay home.
I'm going to tell them that, and you're going to get yelled at even more.
Oh, probably.
So be prepared when you show up to work tomorrow, Alex.
Yeah. I do like them, but I also like sitting in a chair and not doing anything.
Even reading the books you're supposed to be reading.
Yeah, this book is, we're recording it a bit later than normal because this thing was a bear to get through.
A bear, but still rewarding.
It was plaguing us.
I think we just need to cut that joke right out, but...
Well, you're editing this one, so that's on you.
Yeah.
You're depriving these great listeners of
Your
laughter.
horrible dad jokes.
Horrible laughter.
Anyways, let's get to the book. We got shit to do here. So the book it was one of my picks this month. It is a author that a lot of people know of, but a book that very few people have actually read by him. The author is Frank Herbert, best known for his Dune series, recently turned into films again. And the book we are reading is The White Plague.
Not turned into a movie.
Not turned into a movie. So I did a little bit of research, about 20 minutes worth anyways. That's all you needed for this.
It's more than most people.
Exactly. Anyway, so this book came out 6 months after the fourth Dune book came out, God Emperor, which is kind of... So if you look at the Dune books, the first one was completely epic, considered the best sci-fi book ever written by many top 10, 100, whatever lists. It's usually in the top 5 anyways.
Yeah, it's guaranteed to be in the top 5 of almost any list. Yeah.
Basically, it's either this book or one of Isaac Asimov or Frankenstein or something like that.
Some Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, something like that. So it's up there. So the first book was great. The second book, dividends were down a little bit. Third book, people were like, eh. Fourth book, back up there again. Started hitting big numbers again. So, but this book came out at about the same time, within a couple of months, like 6 months, within 6 months of each other. So it was kind of overshadowed. People were like, "Oh, we already got a Frank Herbert book. We don't need another one. We're searching for another sci-fi book."
It also came out shortly before his death, I believe. It's like one of the last books that came out in his lifetime. I did a little bit of research. I think it was... He died in the mid-'80s, and this is from 83, I believe.
Yeah, it was... He put out 2 more Dune books. I do know that. I don't know when those got published. But he never did finish his Dune series. He had like 1 or 2 more books to go.
Yeah, his son had to finish it.
Yeah, and he completely mucked it up.
Yeah, that's the general thing. It's like the first one's great, it's diminishing returns the rest of the time. By the time Brian Herbert took over, it's just sort of kind of kicking a dead franchise.
Yeah, but he keeps pumping out books with his ghostwriter, who they don't really ghost. They just they put his name right on the title too. But I went into the rabbit hole when I first discovered Dune back in college and followed it because he was publishing. He started republishing or just publishing books in the Dune world, the Dune universe at that time in the late aughts. And I was like, oh, give it a shot. And then I read the ghostwriter, Kevin something or other, I think his name is.
That's a weird name.
Yeah. I read some of his books that are just under him. And I realized something really quick. He's not a good writer. He's really not.
Here's a hot take. Ghostwriters, the original AI.
That is, that I could go with that.
It's big business.
Oh, yeah, it's huge business. Most writers, that's how they make their income is ghostwriting. Just writing for someone else and pumping out as much crud as they possibly can.
Yeah, credit to James Patterson. He uses he has people write his books for him, and then he puts his name on them, essentially. But he at least puts their name on the book, too, which is nice.
Yeah, and that'll help those writers in the future eventually get their own publishing deal and and they can pump out their
that's
own
what they
garbage.
say anyway. It's
Yeah,
like dangle the carrot, dangle the carrot.
Yeah, and they can, but it's gonna be the same garbage that it was anyways. And so we did White Plague. So we'll do a quick thing. And this is it was written in the early mid '80s. When you take it in with COVID now, it does hit a lot of points that were like, oh yeah, that felt really familiar.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels. They're talking about like quarantining and like sending people, like immigrants, back to their countries and all these things. I'm like, wow, that kind of very relevant today.
So the back of the cover. What if women were an endangered species? It begins in Ireland, but soon spreads throughout the entire world. A virulent new disease expressly designed to target only women. As fully half of the human race dies off at a frightening pace and life on Earth faces extinction, panicked people and governments struggle to cope with the global crisis. Infected areas are quarantined or burned to the ground. The few surviving women are locked away in hidden reserves, while frantic doctors and scientists race to find a cure. Anarchy and violence consumes the planet. The plague is the work of a solitary individual who calls himself the Madman. As government security forces feverishly hunt for the renegade scientist, he wanders incognito through a world that will never be the same. Society, religion, and morality are all irrevocably transformed by the White Plague. A gripping novel of global disaster by the visionary creator of Dune.
That's how they sell it. Like, this guy wrote Dune. He wrote Dune, guys.
Yeah. This is not his best book ever written by any stretch.
Yeah,
but it's not bad either. It's got a lot of problems with it, but as I said, this is one of those books that just stuck with me. I read it back in college, and there's just certain scenes that never got out of my head. I keep thinking about it, so it's like, hey, this is worth a reread. Maybe see if it was as good as I remember. I think on Goodreads I originally put it at 3 stars. I'd probably keep it at the same.
Yeah, I had it at 3 stars for myself.
But I said it's one of those novels that's kind of gripping. It kind of pulls you in, and just kind of just one of those books that is very dense. There's a lot of thrown at you.
Yeah, the words per page is insane, and it's 500 pages of just really dense storytelling.
Yes, there's dozens of characters. It doesn't go in the direction you think it is a lot of times, and that it can kind of throw you off in the beginning because you're like, okay, we got our antagonist, this madman, John Rowe O'Neill, who has killed off all the women in the world. So we're going to follow the scientists and the government guys that are going to save the day. And then we followed John Rowe O'Neill throughout his journeys. And, okay, where's this going? When are we going to get to the guys that are going to save the day? And then we realize about halfway, 2/3 of the way through it, it's actually a redemption novel of sorts.
Yeah, there's not a lot of redemption at the very end. But, it's like we don't see a lot of the scientists that are working on this. We meet the politicians who are trying to take advantage of it. We meet the people that are trying to find John, and we meet John. We have global perspectives, we have personal perspectives. And a lot of the information we get about how they're finding out about the virus is there's a couple scientist characters, and they hit you with all the scientific techno babble about how it infuses with the DNA strands and yada yada. But I don't know, they're just kind of there.
Yeah, and when I think back to the novel, my mind always went back to one of the women that survives, Kate. I forget her last name. But
Kate something, it's like O'Grady or O'Garrity.
Yeah, so going back to this novel, I thought, half this novel's about her because she's kind of the focal point. She's going to be the one that gets the first vaccine. Her boyfriend is a major DNA guy in Ireland, or a student learning that is, but his professor is a major DNA guy, and they work closely with England, so we're going to get a bunch of that. She's barely in it, and it's like.
Yeah, she.
But as I said, that was thinking back to the book. That was the most when I first read it. That was the stuff that stuck with me. Yeah,
it's a weird storytelling technique because they front load with her quite a bit, and then the virus hits, and the last thing we see is her boyfriend, Steven's getting a phone call saying to lock her into a silo so that she's not exposed to the virus. And it kind of ends on that cliffhanger and keeps you there for like 100 pages. We don't know what happened to her.
So let's get into the story here. So the story starts off with John Roe O'Neill in Ireland and
hanging out with his wife and kids.
Yeah, and he's at a bank to get a loan or a grant money for because he's a professor and he's doing a bunch of DNA research. And this is at the forefront of DNA in the 80s. And little beknownst to him, the IRA is about to blow up a car, which the Provos were very famous for at that time during the Troubles. But they're doing it in Dublin instead of up in Belfast. And his wife and kids are right next to the car when the car explodes. And they get incinerated and he goes crazy. And he basically shelters himself from society as he tries to recover. And he creates a new personality that says, I'm going to get revenge on the Irish people and the English. And then, was it the Libyans?
Yep, the Libyans.
Yeah, because they're the ones providing the weapons and the training.
Yeah, so he wants to punish the IRA for killing his family. So he targets all of Ireland. He wants to punish England because they're giving the IRA a reason to fight. And he punishes Libya because they train the IRA.
Yeah. Also, a little side note, all the chapters, the book is structured very similarly to Dune, where in Dune all the chapter heads have a quote by famous people, typically fictional people from the story. So like in Dune, it's what's his face is the main character's his political wife in her biographies of her husband. In this book, it's the bunch of different political characters that we follow, like Joseph Harity or Doheny or whatever his name is.
Yeah, Doheny. And it'll be quotes from them. And every once in a while, you'll get an actual quote from a historical figure we would recognize sprinkled in there. Yeah, it's a good storytelling technique. It kind of grounds it, but like this is this planet, this is this world, and these could be real people. Yeah, this is it's a very different turn from if you only know Dune. This is very different from Dune. It's set on planet Earth, and it's using modern at the time current events to set the scene. So like the Troubles of Ireland lasted for 20, 30 years.
So basically like the Troubles of Ireland. So you had the quick Irish history lesson here.
Yeah. I did notice this book is, I believe, set in 1996.
Yes.
Which is right around the time the Troubles ended, a year before.
So the IRA was formed in the early 1900s. As an offshoot as the Irish Brotherhood, and they became basically the Irish Brotherhood split off into two different forms. It was a government form and then a military form. And the military form of the IRA fought. They're the ones that ended up in the Easter Rebellion, and I'm forgetting the date now. It was April of 1916, and they took over Dublin, Ireland for 3 days during World War I, hoping that because England was so entrenched with Germany, they would not be able to send a significant force. But unfortunately for the Irish, there was a lot of miscommunication and disinformation, and they didn't get the full countrywide revolution they had hoped, and it ended up in a terrible state where all the heads of the different groups that fought for the Easter Rebellion got assassinated by the British, executed by the British. By 1920, the IRA was back in full swing, and they were in full rebellion again, but in a more guerrilla tactic warfare. They end up making a deal with England, and this treaty ended up causing a civil war in Ireland because the IRA split into two sides where it was pro-treaty and anti-treaty. And they end up, the treaty people won, the pro-treaty people won, and the IRA kind of went underground for a bunch of years. But, as most people will know, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland were split off of Ireland. And it was thorn in the sides for a number of years. IRA kind of goes underground for decades. And then they start to resurface because the civil rights movement in the United States sparks this new idea, hey, why don't we copy them with this nonviolent stuff? So they started doing marches in Northern Ireland, and the pro-English peoples got violent with the anti-violent people of the protests, and the IRA started stepping in and defending them. This created a rift between the IRA, because a lot of them said, hey, we won our war, we don't need to do this, this is not how we do this, we should do it politically. But then another group, a more activist group, said, no, we have to start the fighting all over again. And they call themselves the Provost, the Provisional IRA. And that's where we get into this group here. And so this is 60s and 70s. They start what's called the Troubles, where they start bombing campaigns, and they're using sniper rifles and just
it's like a
guerrilla warfare again, but in urban environments.
Yeah, unofficial war between like Ireland and England, a very small part of Ireland and England.
Yeah, but it mostly stayed in Northern Ireland. A lot of people would get brought across the border because it was really easy to do border crossings because there was no will to actually stop the border crossings. So people would get brought over to Ireland, get disappeared, or vice versa. Whenever the Provo IRA had a problem. And it kind of came to a peak in the 80s for the violence. There was, I think, one hotel that was known as the most bombed building in the world, where it was like a bombing a week there for a number of years, or bombing a day kind of thing, where the lobby just got blown up. And people kept going there, and it was kind of like a tourist thing. Margaret Thatcher they tried to assassinate her a bunch of times. They end up getting one of her close friends instead of her. And then by the 90s, President Clinton ended up stepping in and creating a truce between the IRA, England, and Northern Ireland. And in 99, the Troubles were officially ended, even though there are still other offshoots of IRA groups that are more mobster and terrorists considered instead of actual political fighters at these points. But so that's a quick overview of a very complicated history, very simplified version.
Yeah. It's like 30 years compacted into 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's helpful to know, like, kind of set the scene, because it kind of, like, even though the world ends pretty fast, like, the main players involved, like the IRA, the U.S., the English leaders, like, they all come into play here. And I wanted to read the precede of the book as well, because it just sets up the themes very well in this book, which is really all about...
I did have that as something we should read. So
which is really all about power. There's a lust for power in the Irish, as there is in every people, a lusting after the ascendancy, where you can tell others how to behave. It has a peculiar shape with the Irish, though. It comes of having lost our ancient ways, the simpler laws, the wrath and the family at the core of society. Romanized governments dismay us. They always resolve themselves into widely separated ascendants and subjects, the latter being more numerous than the former, of course. Sometimes it's done with great subtlety, as it was in America, the slow accumulations of power, law upon law, and all of it manipulated by an elitist whose monopoly it is to understand the private language of injustice. Do not blame the ascendants. Such separation requires docile subjects as well. This may be the law of any government, Marxist Russians included. There's a peculiar human susceptibility you see when you look at the Soviets, them building an almost exact copy of the Tsarist regimes, the same paranoia, the same secret police, the same untouchable military, and the murder squads, the Siberian death camps, the lid of terror on creative imagination, deportation for the ones who cannot be killed off or bought off. It's like some terrible plastic memory sitting there in the dark of our minds, ready on the instant to reshape itself into primitive patterns the moment the heat touches it. I fear for the shape of things which may come from the heat of O'Neill's plague. Truly, I fear, for the heat is great. And that's a quote from Fintan Craig Doheny, who's a major character in the book.
Yeah. So one of the things that Frank Herbert is really good at is political intrigue. He's not great at action. He's not great at characters. But when it comes to complex political back and forth, that is where he, even in the Dune series, that is where he excels at. It's kind of his go-to thing, where a lot of the action, it will be off-page.
Yeah, there's a lot of espionage, skullduggery going on, and every event is basically all the characters are looking at it and be like, how can I manipulate this to my advantage? And this book is no different. Like, even when the plague is wiping out billions of people, he's like, there are people that are getting focused on in the story. I mean, it's less caring about how to stop the virus and more about how to manipulate the new now, the new normal.
And where Dune, the first Dune book, it's fairly flawless. Oftentimes you're reading a scene where there's a bunch of people in the room all plotting against each other as they try to find a deal, and you're getting into each of their heads, and it works really well. Oftentimes in this book, it's a miss. It's just a lot of added fluff that's like, that it's not going to matter. Because these are, as you said, a lot of just the same characters, all change the names, but they're all the same.
Yeah, there's a lack of character development in this book. It's like, I think Kate's...
I think if he tried to develop them, this would be like 3 times as long.
Yeah, like Kate's developed, John's developed, the
priest is developed, Harity is developed.
Yeah. But a lot of the characters, like, if they're female, they don't stick around too long because they die. Or the male characters are just like, you are IRA boss. You are president of the United States, and you're going to act like that. And it's just it's more predictable caricatures of people.
Yeah, like at one point, the president of the United States has a heart attack, and the vice president steps in, and he's basically the same as the president.
Yeah,
but he's got slightly different alliances.
He's more keen to try and nuke the major plague areas.
That was another thing. It's like they were awfully easy. We're just going to nuke the plague areas instead of firebombing or just saying, okay, we're going to set up build a wall and shoot anyone that comes within 100 meters of it. It's like the amount of money it costs to have nukes, and we're just like, let's just start dropping nukes on everybody.
I wonder if that's a nod to like the Cold War, which was also pretty big in the 80s.
Yeah, it probably was. Having grown up at the very tail end of that and the results of it, the Berlin Wall falling, I can, I kind of got the sense of that, but again, not growing up really in the thick of it, it just felt kind of weird to me. It's like, why are we just nuking everybody? When we have other technologies that are a hell of a lot cheaper that, could have gotten rid of this, the infected people essentially that are trying to escape. But yeah, so we get John going crazy. We get Kate and Stephen just living life in Ireland as they're about to starting a budding romance. And then then all of a sudden we get the virus starts spreading, and we get multiple timelines kind of going all out at the same time. And it's not really clear. They're not really saying how much time is different, but we got the madman has sent out his letters. We got John that's still changing his identity, moving away from all of his friends and remaining family, and starting to build the virus. And we got Kate and Stephen Bowder, who are medical students at a prestigious Irish college, who are dating, and they're both very religious, so they're following, as Ireland from that time, their dating standards of that time. And
they give in to secret intercourse.
Yeah, because you have to remember that in Ireland, premarital sex and abortions was a big no-no. So shotgun weddings were quite common back then, and these two are no different.
Yeah, they are actually they're taking a riskier trip when the virus drops, and that's kind of when they get stuck together. And lo and behold, Kate does end up getting pregnant, and it's a big deal because she's like the only known pregnant woman at the time.
Yeah, and
it also kind of tracks the amount of time the virus is around, because like the book ends shortly after she gives birth,
which is 2 months early.
Yes.
So you have a 7-month preemie being born, or 2-month preemie, I guess, but it was 7-month gestation. She gives birth because of the stress and the strain of having to flee their location in their tank across the English-Irish Channel there, because the IRA is now under a new name, is trying to do a power grab, and the leader of the IRA is just this power-hungry rapist that any woman that he can find, he'll rape and just kind of toss aside, knowing that because he's infected with the virus that they're going to die, and just no thought of the future. We're all going to die anyway, so I might as well get my pleasure now. Total, utter evil. And it's kind of like a contrast where O'Neill is like, yeah, you have this one guy the madman who is killing all the women, but he's a different kind of madness. He's like, no, this very specific reason why I'm doing this, where you have this other bad guy who's doesn't care about the world, and he's just there for his own pleasure.
Yeah, I wish I'd bookmarked it. There's a really good quote talking about O'Neill's motivations and comparing it to the IRA's motivations, whereas O'Neill is pushing the blame onto he's reacting to his wife and children dying by pushing the blame onto other people, whereas instead of accepting his situation. And that's exactly what the IRA is doing as well. Like, they're bombing people that didn't need to be bombed, and they're attacking people, and they're creating violence and hostility in a world where people are trying to live their lives because they can't handle what's happening to them. And so they're creating noble causes, even though the things they're doing are monstrous and violent at times.
Yeah, and yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the plague hits. He has a couple different strains of it, so it becomes almost impossible to treat. And the women start dying off. I think by the end, it comes down to there's one woman for every 5,000 men on the planet.
It ends up at the very end, it's 1 to 10,000. But they said basically it's dropping rapidly. And what happens is we end up, for most of the novel, following John O'Neill under his final name that he takes, which is John O'Donnell. And he ends up sneaking into Ireland after he escapes to America. He gets the virus out, severely infects himself, so wherever he goes, he's infecting everybody else also, because he's just...
Yeah, he actually almost dies from the virus himself, which he's rescued, but it's funny because he keeps meeting... females who, right before the virus really takes effect, he keeps meeting female people who actually aid him and help him out.
Yeah, and he doesn't quite understand what he's doing as he's doing this, but he eventually gets to Ireland.
It's the intent of going there, posing as a molecular physicist, and he is one, but
he wants to go there, get in with their scientists and
disrupt the research.
Yeah, disrupt any research. Even though it doesn't explain why he thinks the Irish would have the research, because typically, especially in this time, Ireland was a very poor country. They did not have the resources that they do now to do these kind of things. And it would have been up to the United States and Britain and Russia primarily to figure this out.
It is weird they would set the main research facility up in one of the areas that was specifically targeted by the virus. You'd think they would send samples to Russia or something like that, where it's more rural and you can more easily do it.
And I said England, it made sense to have a major facility because they had the resources to have that. They had the educated people to have that, so they already had everything in place. It was just a matter of did they have enough information? And as we do find out, the English do end up getting the virus. Even though the Irish are the ones that get the key, it's the English that break the code. And with the help of the Americans that they send over there and the Russians that they send over there to break the code.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's disguised himself thoroughly when he gets to Ireland, and he gets identified almost immediately. But it's also funny because there's no way to verify his identity because the people who were bringing him into the country were just being really brutal and cruel for no reason, and they destroyed his passport, so he had no identification on him to show who he was. So he just says, "My name is John O'Donnell" instead of John O'Neill, and nobody's able to do it. But they kind of some people know his face, and he matched the description to a degree. So they're like, let's see if we can pair him with people while he travels across Ireland and see if we can get him to a minute.
The whole idea of we're going to make him travel across Ireland in this big odyssey made absolutely no sense.
It was so stupid. Oh my God, I'm glad you agree, because I'm reading, this is the most convoluted, stupid idea. Just talk to him and hope he admits something.
It's a quick interrogation ended up solving the whole thing anyways. Enough that they're this is definitely the guy, and then he ends up confessing to the priest in a confessional. But so it was, the whole thing was just stupid. And then I never understood why Americans, when they got his fingerprints and other markers for identification, why they didn't want to share. It's why are you so they're pretty sure he's been roaming Ireland for 5 months now. Yeah, why is this such critical information to hide? You're basically saying, if you have him, we're going to nuke you. If you don't have him, we might nuke you anyways as soon as we find him and we know he doesn't have the virus anymore. So why are you hiding that information when the Irish are asking for it, knowing that they might get nuked?
Yeah, I think it's part of that power dynamic. It's we have this, but again, we're not sharing it.
But I said it made no sense in the power dynamic because it's just preventing anyone from actually moving forward. So it said you're not gaining power by not sharing the information. You're hurting yourself. So you're spiting your foot to get rid of the thumb kind of thing, the big toe kind of thing. It's like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, it's sort of I'm trying to make other comparisons, like The Walking Dead. Like, the main villain isn't the zombies, it's the people. It's like they're always like trying to find a new safe place, and the people there are always trying to kill them or manipulate the situation to their own gain. And like that's exactly what's happening in this book. And so any little bit of information, people just hold on to it.
So another thing that bugged me early on was when the scientists are first meeting and they're trying to figure out how John created the virus, but mostly how did he spread the infection. And none of it they're just making basically wild guesses.
Yeah, it's a lot of like science babble. Like, are the males the carriers, or is it airborne?
But again, they had no research to go in. They're just saying, let's just throw out a bunch of ideas and say the one we like the best. And it was kind of, to me, it was kind of a lack on Herbert's part on his research on how we track diseases, because even in the early 80s, before we had methods for tracking. Well, they weren't as sophisticated as they are now. It became more sophisticated in the late 80s when the AIDS epidemic smashed us. So I get if maybe he just didn't have that information.
Yeah, like all the main information, all the stuff they learn, it's usually through epiphany or sudden realizations. It's not through the scientific method and hard work. Because that doesn't turn pages really. But
but as I said, reading it now when you had the AIDS epidemic, we had SARS, and then we had COVID just recently. People are a lot more literate with how we do tracing and the RNR, the infected versus how many people that infected person will infect, kind of stuff. So we are a lot more literate than Herbert would have been in the early 80s. But still, it's like you could have done some research with the CDC and say, how would you deal with this? And it would have been much more, I don't know, just realistic, I guess, than it is. Because the way they say, they come to the conclusion that he infected the money made absolutely no sense for logic on how they came to that. But that was the right answer.
Yeah, they just keep throwing answers. This is a spaghetti testing. Yeah. But actually, since they stripped him naked when he got to Ireland, and I wrote a little note down. It said that symbolizes John's rebirth. So there you go.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that. I also got like wandering the desolate wasteland that was Ireland, and just kind of like his descent into madness, doing that. And by the time he returns to society, it's completely different. It's all out war. There's been a million internal power struggles. I actually equated that to. Have you ever read King Lear?
I have not.
It's got very different plot to it, but it actually follows a lot of generalized themes of King Lear very closely.
Okay, that's definitely interesting. I do see how a lot of people would get very annoyed with this book, with especially the way the female characters are treated too.
Yeah, they all die.
Well, not only that, but just the way, like I say, Kate's treated, where she's just kind of a second-class citizen. But again, if you look at the 80s and how other societies, even especially outside the United States, treated their women, it does make sense. A lot of places, even in Ireland, they were kind of second-class citizens. And you can see the difference, the way the women are treated by the elites in the United States, like the scientists. Hey, we're going to get our wives to these remote places in Montana and Idaho, and they got their guns to defend themselves, and and like Ruckerman, he was kind of a character. I was hoping he was going to be a bigger character in this read-through. So I didn't remember enough of it. I was like, yeah, he seems like a character that you could really sink your teeth into, because he's just like action guy for a scientist. And older man, his wife who's an older lady, he's like, yeah, get up into the Montana hills and we're gonna defend our property while I figure this stupid thing out, and we'll get it done. And Beckett's got his wife and kids squirreled away somewhere in Minnesota, I think. And
yeah.
But so none of that ended up being. None of those women were really explored. But we get Kate, who's just this floundering woman who's very naive, very submissive, that just letting things happen to her.
Yeah, it's almost interesting too, because when they first get the call that the virus is landed and it's spreading quickly, like they don't talk to Kate to say, hey, barricade yourself in the silo. They talk to Steven and they say, hey, barricade Kate in a silo. So they're basically telling him to imprison his girlfriend with very little detail of what's going on. So
and Steven just follows. Yeah, I'll do whatever you say because I hero worship this professor who's teaching me this modern science stuff that very few people know. So I better listen to him.
Yeah. And by the time she comes back, she's just a paranoid mess. She's pregnant, and that's really her big role. Is I don't know, it's like some sort of Virgin Mary thing going on, but she's become this huge like political bargaining chip because she's the only pregnant woman in the world. So that's a big deal. But yeah, she just kind of like sits there and worries the whole time when like. Steven has a couple of epiphanies while he's sitting there with her, but otherwise his job is just to like keep her calm.
Hey, so I have a quick quote here I want to read. It kind of brings a lot of this together with, especially with John O'Neill and the dangers of his thinking on justifications. John looked down at his hands. Peace had never been part of it, he thought. There had only been O'Neill's need to strike back. Who could deny the bereaved man that? John felt somehow like O'Neill's psychiatrist, understanding the man, neither condemning nor absolving. So again, it's just, a lot of these characters justify their actions, saying, "How can you blame us for how we're acting? We're just reacting to how the world's treating us." John O'Neill says, "The IRA bombed my family, killed them," completely ignoring the fact that dozens of people died, 100 people were wounded and seriously maimed, but only his family mattered. Therefore, he needed to. How can you blame him for reacting and trying to get back at the IRA, and the English for continuing this fighting, and the Irish for supporting these terrorists? Just like how the President of the United States in this story is making power deals and trying to bring down the old guard while bringing his own people in. And the scientists are trying to backstab each other so that whoever's country that ends up making the vaccine is the country with all the women. They can save all their women while they control all the power. Use it like they would use nuclear bombs, where they can then send infected people to kill all the women of another country that they don't like. And how can you justify it? Well, we're just defending ourselves. How can you tell us not to when we know, if America doesn't have this technology and Russia does, they're just going to use it against us. So therefore we had to have it and use it against them first. It says it just very dangerous justifications. And this is kind of gets where Herbert's kind of getting into his rhythm and doing a little bit better with his maybe not plotting, but his political intrigue and kind of just that, asking those questions. And he doesn't really answer them necessarily. He's just, forcing you to think, like, how would you react? Are your justifications for your major losses equal to and deserved to the rest of the world? If your family was killed, Alex, would you create a super virus, and is that deserved?
No.
If you had the ability, Alex.
Yeah, I just mope for a while.
Yeah, you are kind of mopey, aren't you?
Oh, always. So yeah, John travels with a mute boy, a priest, and Joseph Harrity, who's the guy who planted the bomb that killed his family.
Yeah, but
unknown to him.
Unknown to John. And Harrity is kind of a strange character. He comes off originally as just a brute force kind of guy, the IRA guy. He's
an enforcer.
He is a enforcer, but then all of a sudden, towards the end, you learn, he was actually a lawyer, or had the potential to be a major politician, and he was this really smart guy, but he went down the wrong path, and his whole character kind of changed halfway through, where he started going from just a brute force guy and to all of a sudden he's a Green Beret type guy, and
he's just kind of whatever they needed the plot to have him be.
And then at the end, he's just an alcoholic, and then he ends up getting assassinated by the head of the IRA.
Yeah, they're having like a trial because eventually they make it to where were they headed? Dublin?
Well, they went to Dublin, but I forget what the research facility was, but they ended up taking him to the research facility.
Yeah, where they by that point John's had his bit more of a psychotic break, and he's like the entire time they've been traveling, they've been having these philosophical conversations. Talks about God, talks about vengeance, talks about what it means to be human, and he's kind of started to realize like the magnitude of what he has done by manufacturing this virus, and he eventually confesses to the priest, and then the members of the IRA torture the priest until he breaks the confession secret and tells them that, this is in fact John Rowe O'Neill.
Yeah, and So it's kind of a redemption. At this point we're realizing it's a bit of a redemption story, and it's not so much a redemption for John O'Neill, because when you've killed half the human population, how can what is the proper punishment for that? And that's the whole point of the mute boy, is he's kind of what represents, because his mom died and he took a vow of silence until the man that killed his mom is found and killed. So it's almost a redemption story in that at the very end the boy forgives John O'Neill, and even Kate, when she gives birth to her daughter, and they're in the ship, and she says, "This is what we're gonna name our daughter." I didn't recognize the.
Is it Gila?
Yeah, Gila. I didn't recognize the myth that it came from, but essentially it's a Irish curse to name your kid this until the people of Ireland can forgive that woman. So she says, you need, to her now husband Stephen, you need to forgive Gila her sins so that we can forgive Ireland's sins. And he's forced to say, okay, yes, I will forgive Gila all of her transgressions and her lover's transgressions, and we can move on. And so it was basically instead of getting revenge, finding forgiveness kind of thing. And as we find out that John O'Neill, his psyche can't handle that forgiveness, and the madness finishes consuming him.
Yeah, his punishment isn't really like, if you read like a regular political thriller, like he would die at the end, but he kind of is unable to come to terms with what he's done, and he has a complete psychotic break, and he becomes what's known as like the Banshee, and he runs around the hills screaming.
And people stick out food for him like they do for the little people, and he basically
he becomes like an urban legend.
Yeah, and basically it's kind of at that point in the story we're getting how the Irish are very big into their myths and their legends and creating stories out of those, and how all of a sudden, because of this whole thing, they had stopped making myths and legends and telling stories, but this was a rebirth to that, even where now all of a sudden we can start giving myths to the madman.
Yeah, and the rebirth isn't all good things too, because there's, like we've been talking about, like the whole like quest for power. It's there the entire time, and I was going to read the little stab at the beginning of the final chapter, which is Jost Hupp says it. This is another character in the book. I forget what he does exactly.
He's one of the scientists. I think he's the French scientist, or one of the French scientists.
Yeah, that sounds right. The failure of civilization can be detected by the gap between public and private morality. The wider the gap, the nearer the civilization is to final dissolution. So I think that kind of goes with the final decisions of the people in power, because there's now so few women. It becomes this huge, like we're talking about, like, oh, we want to rebuild society, we want to repopulate the world, we want to protect these women that are now crucial parts of our life. Well, I mean, women are always crucial parts of our lives, but they're like now, like every single woman is an essential person, because every single woman needs to be creating more children to save the species.
It's basically an Adam and Eve situation where Eve is, the last woman standing, but you have a million Adams, and okay, now what do we do, because we understand.
So on the outside they act like they're taking precautions to protect people, but in reality it's like, I think it was mentioned before we started recording, it's like it was turning into like a Handmaid's Tale situation where women are being trapped into situations where they're going to have children with 10, 12 men.
Well, that's the other thing, is the scientists realize as soon as they get the key to this virus, and they're hinting at it before, having the key to this virus is going to unlock a lot of medical miracles, one of which is immortality or near immortality. Another is they can decide the sex of the child before birth. Another is they can cure basically every disease known to man. They can create any disease that they could ever imagine to kill off millions of people. They can do all sorts of things. And what they find at one point in the novel is that it's moved from humans to all mammals. And so all of a sudden all these other animals are dying, and now it's ecological crisis going on. But what this does is it allows them to say, hey, to Kate, you're going to live 5,000 years. You're going to stay childbearing for most of that. You can have as many kids as we need until we re-equalize the population. Not understanding that, when people start living 5,000 years, what is that going to do to that kind of population where you're basically immortal? I mean, human modern civilization is only a few thousand years old here. I mean, you think about it. Basically, what we call history is, 4,000 years, maybe? Is, 2,000 to go back to the Christ, and then it's only like 2,000-3,000 years before that, before we get start getting cities and whatnot and farming. So just that whole implication, they're not even thinking about. They're just saying, "Oh, look at what we could do now. We're immortals. We're gods." And the women are like, "Oh crap, we're cattle now. We're just breeding fodder." But someone like Kate, who's been naive for most of the story, is realizing, "Hey, I got all this attention now. I got power," but she realizes that this power is fleeting. She has a small chance to grab it, and when the admiral that kept people from getting into Ireland and England comes up, says, "I want you to be my wife, and I understand you have a husband, but you get to have multiple husbands now, a polyamory type relationship." She says, she looks at where here and women are being shared among thousands of men, and she's like, "Okay, this guy has a whole navy behind him. I can have a handful of the most powerful men in the world giving me daughters for the next 10, 20 years instead of being passed around like a common whore." And one of the scientists, Beckett, his wife is doing the same thing to him. And he has 2 daughters, and his wife is like, "By the way, I'm going to essentially set up a bunch of marriages for your daughters with powerful men, because the last thing we need is for them to be thrown into the common thing where just anybody with a dick can take them." And it becomes this weird thing of what is question of what is power? Who actually has the power? Do the women have any true power, or is it all just kind of made up in their heads? So it asks a lot of good questions, sometimes sloppily, but it does make you think. And you got me on that graphic novel series, The Y Man, where they went the other direction, where they killed all the men in the world.
Oh yeah, Y the Last Man.
Yeah. So that had a lot of similar themes to it, obviously, just going the other way, where there's only one man left on the planet.
Well, there's 2, yeah. There's the man and his monkey.
Yeah, his monkey, yes. Don't forget the monkey. But yeah. Anything else you want to say on the book, Alex, or is that?
No, I mean, you gotta read it to get everything. We definitely.
Oh yeah, well, we definitely glossed over 90% of it. There is a lot going on here. It is very dense.
Yeah, it's 250,000 words later. It's like, oh my god. But that's my biggest criticism of the book, is like he's trying to cover all his bases, but he still leaves some really stupid stuff in there, like the whole trip across. Like it's like he needs to have this trip across Ireland, and like the way he manipulates the plot to have that happen is just ridiculous.
So, what are your final thoughts, Alex?
I mean, I mentioned 3 stars at the beginning. It is like it's thought provoking. There's I forget which book it was, but like where the philosophy of the book got a little heavy-handed. This one definitely falls in that category of heavy-handed philosophy, kind of bogging down the action of the story. However, I mean, like you said, it sticks with you. So there's some good parts, there's some slogging parts. So overall, it's not what I would normally read. I'm probably not going to revisit Frank Herbert anytime soon.
So you think?
Yeah, so I think. Yeah, till season 3, then I'll. But
season 2.5.
Yeah, every bonus episode, Frank Herbert.
We're gonna do the whole Dune series.
Yeah, but yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I always said it's a slog. It's dense. It's long, but it's not a bad thing. It's by no means a perfect book. There's a reason why Dune is the best sci-fi book ever written, and this is kind of the forgotten book of Frank Herbert. It's just this needed a few rewrites and tightening up a lot of things to have made it better. And
yeah, if you took out like 100 pages,
I don't know if you took out 100 pages, but reuse those 100 pages in a different manner, either developing more of the characters, doing something more with the heavy-handed philosophy, making it more nuanced, anything like that. There's a lot of things you could have done with that 100 pages instead of just cutting it out. That would have made the story better. It does get a lot into religious overtures that were well done. The redemption story ended up being better than I remembered. So a lot of areas fell flat. A lot of areas just drags for days. You're reading through. It's like, when is this section going to end and we can move on to something better? And characters flying in and out that are so two-dimensional that they all blur together. But like I said, it's a book that sticks with you. It's been on my mind for 15 plus years now, and yeah, it's definitely worth a read, I think. Even if it is a hard read, it's worth working through. And especially nowadays with like I said, we've had several pandemics that we've lived through now, and it does touch that weird chord of dealing with COVID and everything, and even with like the political stuff we're going through right now, where people are for or against it, it's just utter chaos at times. That's like, yeah, it's a lot of this rings familiar. So I got some questions for you, Alex.
Lay them on me.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. John Rowe O'Neill's reaction to his wife dying feels extreme. Is he meant to be a tragic figure, or is it just a loose justification for his evil?
I think there's a tragic figure feel to that. Like I said, with the King Lear vibes, where he goes crazy and he does things that he shouldn't do, but in the end he tries to find some redemption at the end. He's definitely a tragic hero, I would say.
I remember there was one part of the book, I forget who it was, they're talking about his justifications, and they say, oh yeah, his wife and children were killed, and someone had replied that, I think it was Kate saying that thinking that it's much more romantic to think that he's getting revenge for his wife and not at the kids. More, the kids kind of ruin the romance of the story, and it does kind of go on about the wife and less about the kids. And I know you don't have any kids, Alex, but if my kids died, I'd be devastated, and it would hit differently than the wife. I mean, it would be devastating for anyone dying, but so it hits differently,
Yeah, I mean, if we lost Becky, like, we'd lose all our listeners.
Yeah, well, a good half of them anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, the kids aren't listening to this, nor should they be listening to this. Yeah. Having lived through a pandemic, does the book have a realistic feel in the reactions of the people and the governments?
Well, I mean, yeah, it was the quick to quarantine people that definitely hit. It's like, oh yeah, that's like within a couple weeks, like, we're all inside, as they say. I think the willingness of people to be quarantined and isolated I don't think Herbert would have predicted that, because, like, I don't know, if you remember COVID, there's people that resisted it very heavily, and there had to be, like in other countries, there was, like military, like patrolling the streets to keep people inside, and like here it was a big struggle in the U.S. to try and quarantine people. Whatever side, whether you agreed with that or not, that's what it happened.
I think that with the rapidity of how fast the women died or the girls died in this, that the quarantine made more sense, because basically if you catch this and your whole family, all the women in your family are going to die within a week, you're going to take it a lot more seriously than when they say 2% of people die and it's almost all old people.
Yeah.
So that is definitely, for the quarantine side of it, has a different feel for it. Where I think a lot of mothers or parents in general would say, my children are going to die from this. I'm going to lose.
Yeah,
my daughters are guaranteed to die.
If you get it, it's a death sentence.
Yeah, they're going to be, we're quarantining and we're going to do whatever it takes. So I do think that is a major difference between COVID and this. So, when you say, 2% is just the old people, okay, I don't know that many old people, just my parents, and they're fine. I don't know.
But yeah, I think I don't know, Herbert's probably familiar with how people like preparations for pandemics, so that's probably what he was going off of.
I do feel that the governmental subterfuges were a little extreme. Like, I don't think again, seeing how the pandemic happened, how much cooperation there was. Yeah, there's still competition, but it wasn't like if China beat us to a vaccine, we weren't gonna, and it being a perfect vaccine, we weren't gonna say, oh, screw them, and China wasn't gonna be like, no, we're not sharing with anybody. They're looking at us like, hey, we can get, we're all looking at, if we are the first ones to get a good vaccine, we make a lot more money by sharing it with everybody. selling it on the cheap, and we get more renown from everybody for saying, we covered our people first, but then we sold it. We were mass producing so fast that we were able to sell it to you guys on pennies on the dollar, vaccines. So I think that side of it he ended up getting wrong, I guess. He's going off of a Cold War standard versus what actually probably ended up happening post Cold War. I did like how he predicted China's rise to power, though. Did you catch that? Where they were the ones that came up with their own vaccine and ended up having this major influence in becoming a powerhouse out of the blue in this world here at the very end. Did you catch on to that?
I must have missed that a little bit, but yeah, it does predict a lot. So, and I mean, it's probably like he also like there have been pandemics in the past, and you can see how people react to them. So it seems pretty accurate for what you might expect if such a deadly virus were to rip through the world.
Does the ending with the surviving woman becoming powerful feel like a likely outcome in real life? Or how do you think they actually, or do you think that they're actually represented in the book where they just become cattle and breeders?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. Like, and this book is trying to tell you that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And now that men have really 100% of the power, it's kind of corrupting them into doing this to the females of the species. So it's it's hard to say. It depends on who's in power if something like this were to happen. But it's a scary thought for sure.
I mean, there were men that, especially like guarding Kate, that treat her almost like they treat royalty in England, whereas like you are kind of our figurehead. You are this where they're putting her on a pedestal, and while they realize that they're never going to have their own families now, they saw the higher power of keeping this pregnant woman alive and keeping the human species alive, and they were more than willing to be alone as long as they were part of the story of, hey, I protected the human species, I saved this woman's life. So there were people that were good-hearted and true, and were not just like all about me, gain power. But they tended to be the lower classes of society that dealt with the higher classes of society, worked with them. So it was just this, you got this where the masses were just kind of doing their own thing, and when at the very end, and they say, okay, put your name on a list, and these 1,000 men will get this one woman, these 1,000 men will get this other woman, but then they said you had individuals that, no, we're going to rise above this, and we lived our lives, and we have a higher power to, kind of like the priest. He's like, yeah, I have a higher power, and I'm not going to, while I'm tempted by booze, women don't tempt me, and my job is to save Kate's soul and try to give her what guidance I can before he got pushed out of power and kind of relegated to the background, even though Kate preferred his ministry versus the other one that the English were pushing on her. But I don't. It's hard to tell how it would go. I know, and say if it went the other way and you only had a handful of men to a lot of women, there's a lot more options for repopulating the earth, just the way it is. So
that's why doe season is very short, but deer season is quite long.
Yeah, for shooting bucks, you can shoot as many bucks as you want because one buck can breed 100 doe in a season. How does this book compare to the Dune series and with his other novels? Have you read any of his other novels, Alex?
I've only read Dune.
Yeah, you did read Dune. Okay, I didn't know that. But how do you remember much of Dune?
It's been a minute. I mean, obviously Dune's the better book. Like I think I've described Dune as like the Mona Lisa of sci-fi. It's like really one of the first books that comes to mind when you talk about the sci-fi genre is Dune. So comparing a lesser-known Frank Herbert book is kind of like comparing a turd to a sunset.
Well, I mean, it's when we've compared other books, it's usually a really bad author to a really good author, where this is the same author, just his better novel versus his not so good novel.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, Dune it's good. I honestly don't really enjoy Frank Herbert's writing overall. Kind of like similar complaints about this book with Dune. Like it's overly overwritten. Like there's so much going on, and like that one makes sense because you're building an entire world. But and like this one's just set in this world, and we kind of everybody's familiar with it. Who's gonna read this book? So like that overwriting makes sense because you're world building, telling a story, developing characters, yada yada. If this is his writing style for everything, though, it's just like, oh my god, how did you write so many books? This is such a slog.
Yeah, he definitely has a trope that he likes to write. He definitely follows the same writing patterns. It said that the way he writes the chapter headings is the same in most of his books. I've read all of his Dune books. I've read a few of his other books. Compared to the Dune books, especially the first four, this is definitely of a lesser class. The fifth one I just reread, and it's really awkward and weird. He goes out there on some sex stuff that's like, okay, you have some really weird ideas. But reading his other books, which aren't bad, but they're just pulpy. They end up having that sci-fi pulp feel where there's just something missing. They're not bad per se, but they're not memorable. They don't stick with me. I don't really remember much about them. So like I said, this kind of falls in that middle ground. Yeah, what worked for Dune, he tried to recapture that lightning in this book, and it missed just enough.
Yeah, I think this would have been better off with a faster pace. Like I like the thoroughness, but just kind of write it like a traditional thriller where it goes very fast.
Okay, so final question. I know we've kind of covered this, but how does the book address the issues of gender and power dynamics overall?
I mean, there were like the original conclave that was like trying to figure out what to do with the virus. It was much more equal, I guess, with female to males. But then the women died off, and the male to female power dynamic changed dramatically. So it's the men are in power, and the women, if they don't have any kind of leverage, they become cattle, and that's what it is.
Oh, we didn't cover it in here, but this was a big section of it. The guy that restarted the Druid religion, McCrae, and he had 32 women to himself.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's like, and he's got like half of them pregnant, and everyone's just watching from the distance because he's got enough firepower to defend his property or whatnot in the middle of Ireland, and everyone's all pissed off. He's like, hey, why does this guy deserve this weird looking dude that's not really Irish but claims to be Irish get to have all these women? But because they're all covered in plague, and this guy has this one little 1,000-acre island of paradise, they can't go in there without killing all of them. They don't dare go in there to kill them all because that's 32 women, and that's when you got 1 to 10,000. That's that's quite the thing. So, but so that was just a weird dynamic there, and he's trying to bring his nephew in because it's his only living relative, and he ends up getting put in some sort of prison camp, and never clear what happens to him. But yeah. So it was just, yeah, it's definitely a weird thing. I think, like I kind of said earlier, you had to read this in the eyes of a person living in the 80s, because the way women were treated in the 80s is very different than the way they're treated now. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of the same problems, and while things had changed drastically for women, especially women in America, by the 80s, thanks to the revolutions of the 60s and 70s, the cultural revolutions, the 80s was kind of like the first time where women were in the workforce in mass, becoming independent, not basically being able to support themselves, not needing to get into a marriage to survive, essentially. But they were still treated kind of like objects back then, and they were sexualized, and to a much greater extent than they are now. And so reading it from that perspective is very different than reading it from a modern perspective nowadays, I think. And it does take a hard look at what a world without women would look like, because like at one point when they're driving through whatever city it was, there was a bunch of men that had become cross-dressers or transsexuals or whatever they wanted to be called at that point in time, and it was just this weird dynamic of these desperate, horny men that it's especially in the 80s where a lot of in Ireland especially, that was a crime. You could be put to death for wearing women's clothing or sodomy or all that stuff.
It was either that or like the suicide rates in Russia skyrocketed.
Yeah, but these are desperate times and people are horny and they're like, okay, well, is this mockery of what women, what we consider a normal woman from that time period worth what we're dealing with now? Because I am in, these people are in pain, a certain kind of pain and of loneliness and longing and not being able to do their own laundry and cleaning their house and making a meal.
Basic things you take for granted that you really should know how to do.
Yeah, you should. But I said this is the 80s, and it wasn't as bad as it was in the 50s. But there were still women's work. Women were in the workplace, but still expected to do all the housework. So it just kind of made you really think hard on that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of rambling now, Alex. Get me out of here.
All right. Do you have any more questions for us?
No, that was it.
All right, it's the last one.
Yeah, not a lot of questions here. I knew it was going to be a dense book, and there was just too much to cover and what to cover, and not wanting to do the nitty gritty and the weeds.
Yeah, it's not like a use of weapons where we wanted to do a deep dive because everything was so fascinating. This one was a little more like, let's just kind of go over the top and just talk about the key points.
Yeah, bird's eye view here.
Yeah. All right. So that was The White Plague by Frank Herbert.
Next month is Alex month. What do you got for us next month?
So I know you always want to do the pick one book that the other's not going to like. I didn't really do that. Last time I went with a book I hadn't read before. I just kind of picked one. I did that again this time. So this one is going to be Sight Unseen by both Joe and myself. It's called The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I'm excited to read it. I've heard good things.
It has been very hot for quite a few years now. Everyone's talking about it, all those TikTok people.
Yeah. So we're gonna read that one. We're gonna give it a try. I'm excited. Tune in next month. I'll either be super depressed or be like, yeah, it's pretty good.
But yeah. So that is next month. That'll be on the 5th of what month?
Oh gosh,
May. Next month.
The 5th of May.
Yeah, 5th of May. So
Revenge of the 5th.
So make sure you are subscribed. You got everything going so you don't miss that episode. Don't forget we do bonus episodes on the 20th of every month. Quick disclaimer though, I am starting up a master's program for an MBA and Alex is working 7 days a week. So who knows how far into the future these bonus episodes we're going to be able to do every month. We're going to try. We're going to get a few more months before, from our backlog that we can go, but we'll see. It might not be we'll still have our monthly episodes, but we'll see if we're doing a bonus episode every month or not.
Yeah, the bonus episodes might become true bonus episodes. Is what we're trying to say.
Instead of just a guaranteed given.
Yeah. So life gets a little simpler sometime. We'll come back to it full time, but we'll start letting people know once the bonus episodes start dropping off. But there's still plenty in the tank, so we'll see how far we can make those work.
Yeah. So. As I said, subscribe, follow us. We're on Spotify, Apple. Definitely give us reviews and ratings there. Give us comments. We love the comments that have been coming in. We have an email if you want to email us at kendallbookworms@gmail.com. We're on Instagram at kendallbookworms. You can DM us there too if you would like. Definitely like and share our show because that is the best way to grow our show. And if we're going to be cutting back to once a month, primarily, that's going to definitely slow our growth rate at the critical time that we've been starting to grow. So go us. But
there'll be plenty of Bookworms content.
Yeah.
Don't you worry.
See, we're hosted by Podbean. What else we got? Alex has got some books for sale.
It's stuffed and double stuffed.
That's not the books
you
have for
sale,
gosh,
I got confused.
Those are the books you wish you wrote. Your fantasy novels that you wish you had because they're your fantasies.
Yeah. Paul Plimpton vs. Ragnarok and The Destroyer.
Yeah, definitely check those out. They're not half bad. So we'll have the Amazon link for those in the description. We're on YouTube. We post every episode twice because I'm not willing to put the time and effort in to figure out YouTube. Haley, if you want to start taking over our social media, you can figure it out. But yeah, so definitely, if you don't like listening to us on a normal podcast app, you can go there and listen to us there. No video. But yeah, I think that's everything, Alex.
Yeah, I think we got it.
Okay.
So yeah, that was the White Plague. Tune in next time for the Poppy War.
Or the bonus episode.
You get the bonus episode coming up later this month.
Yeah.
So, lots to look forward to. But until then, I'm Alex.
And I'm Joe.
And this has been Bookworms.